Hello everyone and welcome to another workshop video. You might have seen my last video that was actually removing the engine out of the T5. Well, I ended up doing a full engine rebuild on that. Turned out, we can go over here. I'll probably be able to find it. You can see here, decided to spin a bearing. So I think when the water pump failed, the previous owner ran it for quite a long time with a lot of water in the oil, because it essentially drained out into it. That I think has done damage to there. The oil pump was okay, but I have actually replaced that in case that was just low pressure. But yeah, spun a bearing, and so that is part of the conrod. As you can see, knackered. So got a second-hand crank, put that in, all new shells, everything like that. Put it back together, and it wouldn't start. Just cranked over and over and over and over and over again. And I have done a mistake. I should have really bought the Haynes manual before I built the engine, but I built the engine, then bought the Haynes manual, and then went, So if you're ever rebuilding a 2.5 litre 5-cylinder, like gear-driven engine, the gearbox, behind the gearbox, as you'll see up here, behind this cover is basically a full set of gears that goes from the crank all the way up to the top end, and it lines up with the cam. Now I couldn't get the cam wheel to line up correctly, and it turns out that I'm 1 tooth out on my crank on the gear set on the side. I didn't think it needed to be timed at the bottom end, it was all on the top. But what I've done is 1 tooth out at the top means that the camshaft is half a tooth out. So as a result, when you try and start the engine, the cam and the crank sensors don't sort of signal together, so the ECU just goes, well, I'm just not going to put any diesel in, something's not right. Unplug the cam sensor off the top and it runs. So I've actually ran 300 miles in this with the cam sensor unplugged, but I'm slightly down on power and it runs slightly rough. And starting, it has to crank for quite a lot longer for it to know what position it's at to start firing the injectors. So I bit the bullet and thought, right, I'll have to take the gearbox out to take the cover off, to turn the gear set 1 tooth, and then I should be okay. So here is the subframe. So it's actually quite easy to take the subframe off. You just undo the bottom wishbones. I prefer it to the ball joint because the ball joints can be an absolute nightmare sometimes. So wishbone off, and then undo steering rack and your anti-roll bar from underneath. And then it's 4 bolts. There's a front engine mount, as you see there. And then the whole thing will come down. So once it's down, you've got much better access to get the gearbox out. But now that the issue is, I'll have to support the engine, because as soon as I want to take the gearbox out, at the moment the engine is supported by a mount one side and this gearbox one here, but I've got to take that out to get the box out, so I'll have to actually have that supported, which is no problem, can sort that. So take the gearbox out and go from there. So with the bottom of the subframe off, it's just doing things at the top end really to disconnect things. So in here, I've taken off the inlet from the intercooler, so that just goes there. Clears a bit of space, move the water bottle just out over the way, disconnect the battery. So then down there, you'll see that's the gear linkages down there, so they need to just come off. There's a plastic bracket just at the back over here, that's like a push button that just lifts off, so that's easy to do. And then down here, underneath this pipe, you've got the clutch hydraulic connection, and you've got the starter motor. You have to take the starter motor out because in the hole where the starter motor is, there's 2 bolts that the gearbox bolts to the actual engine, so the starter motor has to come off. There's 2 cable connections as well on wiring that just unplug. And then after that, it's just unbolting the gearbox really and getting it out. So all the ancillaries are disconnected now under here. So that's your gearbox, and so that's where you can see the bolt hole actually in there where the gearbox bolts. So I've undone some of the main ones, just left the 3 below, so it's just a bit easier once I lower it back down, because essentially now I need to support the engine block there and then undo this mounting, and after that the gearbox will just unhitch, but you have to drop the engine slightly for it to miss the actual body, which is a bit annoying, but other than that, that's the bottom end off. Then I can get the cover off to where the gears are and reset the gear. Okay, so the gearbox is out. It's a bit of a struggle. I wish I could show you really, but it's only me. So as you can see, I've just got the engine now supported on some pallets and whatnot, and just load it down. I'm using the vehicle ramp to just like raise the vehicle up so it tilts it down. Bit of oil on the floor. There you go. But that is your gear set up the side of the engine. So you've got your main crank is there that runs your oil pump here. That transfers over, and then you've got your sort of alternator side, air conditioning, power steering pump, that sort of thing. You've got a next gear up that's there that then transfers up to one that's behind that shroud, and that is the one that I haven't timed properly. So that has a notch. You can almost see there's actually, just where my finger is, a little dot. So that dot needs to line up when the crank's at top dead center. That needs to line up to a marking that's somewhere around here. And I didn't do that, so the top end didn't line up. Really annoying mistake, because it's a hell of a lot of effort to get to that point. So I'm going to take that cog off the top, get top dead center on the crank, and then put it in properly and start putting everything back together again. So this is the gear in question, and so that's what connects to like the intermediate gear before the crank gear. And you can see here, see that dot there, that needs to line up with that dash. So basically when the engine's at top dead center, that should be pointing at that, and that's when you know that you've got the right, because that's spinning. This is obviously a shorter gear. I think it's something like the crank, the cam spins twice for every crank revolution, or the other way around. So that needs to line up. Mine wasn't, mine was sort of up here somewhere, and so that's why it wasn't lining up properly on the top end. So I'll pop that back in, and then I can check the gears on the top side. So they're intermediate gear, and that's the cam gear. So I can stick those back into the top because I've got it all open here. So they go in there, and I can check the timing before I start putting everything back together. And fingers crossed, that'll be right. So with the other gear back in, this is the next one to go in. So this is like your intermediate, and it's actually, if you see, it's like an off-center to it. And the point of that is this carrier goes on, and you pass it down through the cylinder head. You need to get a little notch on there. That needs to line up with that. And so you'll lower the gear down into there, this is your eccentric sort of pin. That needs to be upwards when you slide it back into the engine. And then with these the two holes that are on there, you basically, with just a little bit of force, twist that, and what it does is it actually spins this gear and engages it and takes any backlash out of the bottom set. And so that's all sort of set in position and tight, and then you can put your cam sprocket sort of gear on the top, put a bit of force onto that, and it takes all the backlash out of the gear set. So I'll slot that into the top next. So the intermediate gear's in there, you can see down just in there, and so then just from the side you can torque it up to the correct torque, and then the cam cog basically goes on the top, slots into the cam, then there's a clamp that goes on the top, and you torque that to something around 120 Newton meters, something like that. And then that is everything on the top end back together. So stick the gearbox in and see if it works. So I've put the cam wheel on, and the marking is around this side. So you run a level, and it needs to line up with a little mark on the wheel, which it does, which is good news. So with all of that, I'll put the gearbox back in, and top back on, hoses back on, and the van should be ready to drive again, which is a relief. So I'll finish putting it back together, turn the key and see what happens. So did it work? Well, as you can see, it's not the VW behind me anymore, which means that it did. It fired straight up, which is a relief after all that hard work. Gearbox in those is so heavy. It's ridiculous, really. So this is a little bit further on from when I was actually doing that video, because I've managed to cover about 500 miles in it now, and it's sort of behaving. And I say sort of because cold starts are rubbish on it. So I have a fueling issue somewhere. New injectors are on it, so I can't see a fuel leak. So it's potentially the tandem pump that, I don't know the mileage. The van itself's done like 185,000, so it could be a bit worn out. That is something that I'll investigate. However, running it once it's on is great. So that is the end of this episode. Next episode, not quite sure. I've got quite a few things going on, as you can see there. So make sure you like, subscribe and all of that stuff, and take care.